Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast. I'm Kim Ingram, the Director of Ministerial Services for the Western North Carolina Conference, and part of my portfolio is leadership development for clergy and ministry professionals. In the work that we do and the time that we spend with clergy and ministry professionals, we continue to understand and discover the stressors, the demands, the all-around busyness of clergy and the lives of clergy. And it is my honor today to get to talk to the folks from the Clergy Health Initiative who have been spending the last, 12 years focusing on and doing research in order for clergy to have healthier lives, to have less stress, and to be able to take better care of ourselves. I had the privilege to be a part of Spirited Life, the first part of this initiative, where we focus particularly on our physical health and better eating habits and more exercise. And it was a great experience for me and for the many clergy who participated in it. So we're looking forward to the second iteration of Spirited Life called Salah, that is an opportunity to focus on stress reduction in the lives of clergy. Today we're going to talk to Regine and Jason from the Clergy Health Initiative, and we look forward to hearing from them. So our guests with us today are Jason Biasi, who is a clergy member of the Western North Carolina Conference and currently serves at the Vancouver School of Theology, where he teaches preaching. We also have Regine Preschel-Bell, who's a professor with the Duke Global Health Institute and the Duke Center for Health Policy and Inequalities Research. And together they wrote Faithful and Fractured, Responding to the Clergy Health Crisis. Thank you all for being with us today.
What a joy.
It's a pleasure.
So the Clergy Health Initiative is a partnership between the Duke Endowment, the Duke Divinity School, and the Duke Global Health Institute. And its purpose has been to assess and strengthen clergy health and well-being. I was privileged to serve in the first Spirited Life cohort in 2010, and it was a really great experience for me. I wondered if you could give us some history on how this emphasis on and concern for clergy health got started.
Absolutely. The Duke Clergy Health Initiative started in 2007. It was funded by the Duke Endowment. And the way it came about is the Duke Endowment, as you know, you can put forth grants, districts can put forth grants. And one of the UMC districts said, our clergy are struggling with their physical health, and we would like a way to try to make them healthier. And so the Duke Endowment said, sure, and gave them probably a smallish grant to do that. And then there was this outcry where every single other district came to the Duke Endowment and said, but the same thing is going on in my area too, and I also want a grant. So in their wisdom, Joe Mann and others at the Duke Endowment worked with the trustees and decided to find a larger program, and that's when the Duke Clergy Health Initiative got funded and started. And our mission has been to understand and improve the health of United Methodist clergy in North Carolina.
So the first program was a fairly extensive program, and many clergy participated. What are some of the things that you learned from the research that you did alongside of it?
Oh, yes. We learned so much from Spirited Life. The grand takeaway, I would say, is we learned that clergy would participate and they would get healthier. But there's so much that goes underneath that. I have to say at the beginning, we did Spirited Life very carefully in that first we had a statewide survey and we assessed what the needs were. And we learned that it was really around physical health. So things like hypertension, cholesterol problems, diabetes problems, and overweight and obesity. Like, we knew that those were issues we wanted to tackle because clergy across the state were willing to take our surveys and tell us. We also learned through surveys, but through focus groups and interviews, that clergy were worried about depression. So we saw high rates of depression in the surveys, and we learned a lot about stressors and feeling stressed in those focus groups and interviews. And so we took all of that on: physical health, depression and stress, and spirited life. And can I just say, I was personally overwhelmed and honored by the response. So we served over 1,200 clergy of the 1,800 we invited. Went through a 2-year program. And when people signed up for the program, they participated. They showed up at the 3 workshops. They took the 10-week online weight loss program called Naturally Slim. They worked with a wellness advocate, which is kind of like a health coach. And to be honest, we just didn't know if people would, because clergy, like everyone, are so busy. And in fact, you could argue that they're busier because they don't know who's going to contact them when and where their needs are going to be on any given week. And so I think what we know now is that there is a need and a hunger amongst clergy to figure out ways to be healthy and strong. And we heard frequently that clergy wanted to do that for the life of the church. That yes, they would like to feel better if they're not feeling well, but by and large, they want to be in their work and their call for the long haul, and to be strong and energized for their congregants.
Kim, as Regine mentioned, it's interesting for me that Regine's a proper scientist, and to have her say about us clergy, wow, you guys really cooperated. Like, as a clergy person, I don't feel all that cooperative, but apparently we do what we're told. So I'm glad we were good subjects. I was one of the people who was in Spirited Life and then was studied in this test, and it just struck me anew, our Wesleyan insight that Christian faith is a matter of kind of dragging one another toward Jesus. Our whole culture changed at clergy gatherings with this thing. Like, instead of potato chips, there'd be vegetables, and I'd be annoyed. And then I'd realize, oh yeah, this is how you're supposed to eat, like, for the rest of your life, if you want to live, or we'd be out at lunch together and food would come and fellow clergy would put half of it in a to-go bag right away and only let themselves eat half of it. Like, in other words, the practices you engage in without even having to think about it are sort of determine who you are. We think that about prayer. That's what Wesley's societies were designed for. It turns out, I think, it's true about eating and exercise too.
Yeah, that is really helpful. I still see people drinking orange juice and water mixed together, which was one of the other practices that we did. I would guess that one of the things that you also discovered, and indeed you have created a resource, is that support on this journey is really important. Of course, we talk a lot about clergy support and clergy peer groups and that sort of thing. But in this sort of case, staff parish committees, pastor parish committees can also provide some significant support. And to that end, you created a program after the first Spirited Life called Pastor and Parish. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the Pastor and Parish program and how churches might benefit from it.
While we were doing Spirited Life, we realized that it was a pretty intense program, 2 years, workshops, small grants, health coaching or a wellness advocate. And that is difficult to replicate and pick up. But we also wanted to have resources that anyone could do that were feasible and inexpensive. And to that end, Ed Moore and Kate Rugani, they got together and they made a series of 6 videos. And the way Pastor and Parish works is you, any church and PPRC or SPRC can do it. So you would order a workbook for each of your S or PPRC members, and there's a facilitator guide. And in this one, the lead pastor does not have to be the facilitator. Someone else can play that role, but any clergy are invited and included in this group. And the committee comes together and watches a 10-minute video and then goes through the workbook exercises together, and it might take about an hour all told. There are 6 sessions, and they are baptism, So it starts with why are the committee members doing the work? And then discipleship, and how does this lead to making disciples of Jesus Christ? And then there's probably my favorite session is called the Sacred Bundle. And this one, given that Methodist pastors move all the time, often you don't know the full history of the congregation or congregations that you're serving. And so what happens in the Sacred Bundle is there's this description of how a number of American Indian societies would have an oral history. And to prompt the oral history, they would actually have a bundle of various items, maybe a bone or an arrow or a piece of cloth. And each one would prompt someone from that community to be able to share a longer story that had helped form their community. And so they're hearing about that. There's an opportunity for a discussion amongst the committee members about, okay, well, what's in the sacred bundle of our church? What does our pastor or pastors not know yet about the church? And it can be uncomfortable to talk about some difficult things that congregations may have gone through, but it's really important that the clergy of that church know what they are.
Kim, one thing I saw after moving up here to Vancouver that isn't in the book, Jalen and I have four clergy couple friends. They're all married to each other. So there's 3 couples. All 6 of us are clergy. That was awkwardly put.
Oh my
anyway, they all came up here with their kids for vacation in Vancouver, and Jalen had her clergywoman friends participate in a church service up here. And so it was a way of making our friendships and their long history, and even our children and our children's friendships with one another, kind of visible to the congregation Jalen was serving, so that subsequently folks in that congregation could ask about our friends. How are they doing? Have you gotten to see them? So one of the things we do write about in the book is, I think one thing that SPRC can do is be attentive to pastors' friendships, because those friendships and their health will largely determine, not largely determine, that's too strong, will certainly influence, somewhere between certainly influence and largely determine one's health and commitment to ministry. And they're usually not visible. Like, clergy don't show those friendships. We tend to be weirdly private about them. But I'd almost want to say you're only as healthy in ministry as the health of your friendships.
So the pastor and parish program is more of a holistic kind of approach toward well-being and health of the clergy and of the committee. And my guess is then it could be contagious, that it's something that could kind of spill over into the life of the church, in order for people begin to understand what it means for us to have wellness, holistic kinds of lives, particularly as we live out our Christian faith.
Absolutely.
I think that's very true. And we even had an external group evaluate pastor and parish and what it did. And they went and they interviewed for the first 10 committees that went of different churches that went through pastor and parish. And they went back to those committee members and clergy a year later. And universally, the clergy said that they felt less stressed. And universally, the committee members said that they felt more in tune with their pastor. That we had been hoping for. What we did not hope for, but which also happened, is a committee member said that they felt a greater bond with each other. And that started to happen around that sacred bundle session.
Wow.
And then there are a couple more sessions. Like, Jason, I love what you just talked about how congregants can support the friendships and relationships that their pastors have with other people, which can then bring fruit back to the church. One of the sessions is called Stewardship of the Pastor. And that is essentially that. It's making linkages about what kinds of relationships and supports the clergy need. There's also a session on truthful naming. And that is about how we have to be honest with each other and sometimes say the really hard things that we're seeing happen. And as leaders do that together, to then end up with a better result and better leadership.
So
part of the trick of ministry in general is to have committee meetings that can end up feeling bureaucratic and administrative and like something you have to do as an onerous burden, to turn those into opportunities for discipleship, right? So this is part of the pastor's job, is to say, this is not just a budget meeting. This is a chance to meet Jesus. So the fact that Pulpit and Pew has made this so much more readily doable for a PPRC is such a gift.
It's great. So you both referenced, and it sounds like the First Clergy Health Initiative, Spirit of Life, spent some time talking about stress, but you, the research, the initiative has focused now more on clergy and stress. And Jason, I wondered if you could kind of lead us in this conversation, talking about how stress builds in ministry and affects leaders.
Yeah, now that I'm not doing parish ministry, I do notice I sleep better. And it's not that teaching doesn't have its pressures. It does. It has to do with the fact that you're charged to love people, and those relationships are so fraught because you do love people you serve, and there's also going to be tension. God seems to have made it that way. There is no tensionless church. If there's no tensionless church, there's no growth, right? But the combination of tension, trying to lead, people not sure they are entirely on board as they shouldn't be if a vision is bold enough, right? All that gets in your head. And largely we got into ministry because we pleased people, and they told us we were good at this, and we got affirmation for it. And then we get into one of these positions, and criticism we get is so much louder than praise, and it worms its way into your imagination and lives there. And if you're not already given to paranoia, that can make you paranoid, right? And I don't think it's that like churches are any better or worse than other human beings. It's just the way we all are as sinners. So being in parish ministry, I think that the trick is to change the way you receive all of that from this is tension that's stressing me out and making me eat badly and harming my intimate relationships, into something like prayer. That is, I'm going to lift all this toward God, and then I'm going to respond to God's words in scripture and in tradition and give those back to the people. I was never really good at sort of setting that aside, trying to live the rest of my life. And so, like I say, I sleep better now. What I think this research is trying to do is to help people sleep better while in parish ministry, right? Because it's really hard work.
Jason, I'm not surprised that you remember the criticism. Like, that is one of the things that I constantly comes back to our team at the Clergy Health Initiative, and that we're often talking about, like, in any time that we're trying to figure out what might contribute to depression for clergy or stress for clergy or anxiety for clergy, like criticism comes up number one, and or lack of social support. So anyone who's feeling socially isolated, financially stressed, or criticized, like, those come up time and again. And oh, Jason, I remember it was so much fun working with you on Faithful and Fractured, and we had like a year of Wednesdays where we got to talk a little bit and think about where we were going in the book, and I learned so much from you. And I remember once you said that there is a way to be criticized. Thoughtful criticism can be healthy. And I think you said, like, ideally it would happen over a coffee or a lunch that the parishioner was buying, and that it definitely would not happen right after you had just like poured your heart out from the pulpit.
That's exactly right. There's a right way to do it, because you don't criticize something you don't care about, right? Like, it's a weird way of saying I'm invested to criticize something, but we actually don't know how to do it. And we generally just sort of pump that data into the gossip machine and sort of hope it will wind its way around to the right person. But of course, it doesn't work that way. And the gossip machine is noxious, and it's an echo chamber, and data gets through, but it's warped. So I do think you go right to the person. And this is Dietrich Bonhoeffer's rule. You don't say anything to somebody that you wouldn't say with them in the room. And so it's way easier just to go ahead and tell the person directly, right? Now, the other piece of this is, the minute I got out of pastoring a parish and came here to Vancouver to teach, I found myself the most critical parishioner in the room. Like, I thought everything was wrong, and I was some sort of expert. And so I was going to, like, say, well, fix this and do that, and then everything will be fine. The kingdom will come, right? Like, so I was like a worse version than my worst stereotype of the person criticizing me, which was instructive.
Clergy are really difficult parishioners. I never
that's
thought
exactly
of that.
right. So, but if you're going to do it over lunch, you're only going to criticize so much because you're just going to be out too much money pretty quickly.
That's right.
And it's important, I think, for clergy to be able to receive feedback and love in order to be able to better gain some self-awareness and a sense of
you can't respond
how to grow,
or it'll stop coming.
Right. So
and it's awful to do it, but you have to figure out how to do it. That's
right. So that kind of leads us into Spirited Life has sort of a second iteration that is just coming out called Salah. And according to your website, Salah is generally interpreted as pause and listen, or an instruction to take a breath. And I just love that because we all need time to pause and listen, and we need to be encouraged just to breathe. And this part of the initiative focuses on equipping clergy with tools to respond to the stresses of ministry, some of which we've just kind of been referencing. And you've done a pilot, and now it's going to be offered widely to United Methodist clergy in North Carolina. And it feels to me like a gift. And I was hoping that you could tell us more about it.
We are at the Clergy Health Initiative are so excited to be bringing Salah to all the currently appointed, active United Methodist clergy for both the Western North Carolina Annual Conference and the North Carolina Annual Conference, extension ministers included this time. And we're ready, and we're ready because of Spirited Life. The first one, we're ready because of how we've been listening and thinking about stress. And I do want to say that in Spirited Life, I mentioned earlier how much we learned that clergy would participate. And I wanted to add that we also learned that clergy would get healthier. The physical health outcomes of Spirited Life were beyond my wildest dreams. Like rates of metabolic syndrome decreased in ways that we now know clergy are having fewer strokes, fewer heart events, fewer hospitalizations, fewer new cases of diabetes. Like it is really exciting. And in one of our analyses that probably hasn't been heard well across the clergy of North Carolina yet is that the pastors who started the heaviest and weighed the most not only lost substantial weight during the 2-year Spirited Life program, but they kept it off for an additional year and a half. And that is the envy of weight loss programs and researchers around the U.S. So, I mean, thank you for making me look good, but also kudos to you all for such fantastic physical health change. But the problem is that we also set out in Spirited Life to reduce stress and reduce the overall rate of depression for clergy, which kind of hovers around between like 8 and 10%. And when you do kind of like the right analyses, because clergy have health insurance and jobs and are educated, and when you do all of that, you know, the depression rate should really be more like 5.5%. And so that's a concern. And I have to say in Spirited Life, there were individual clergy who might have started with symptoms of depression and then they would go away by the end of the 2 years. But then there would be a new pastor who became depressed, and like overall, the rate stayed the same. And that distressed me. And we didn't have our plan for combating stress in Spirited Life was more about the work that happened through individual wellness advocate coaching. And it wasn't it wasn't the same as saying, here's an evidence-based program that reduces stress. Mm-hmm. It was more like, let's figure out the unpredictability in your life and how you might be able to ebb and flow with that better. So
And
now,
sorry.
Oh yes, please go ahead, Jason.
I mean, one thing I love that Regine found is we pastors can be kind of a martyr club sometimes, right? So you'll get pastors together and they'll talk about how miserable their churches are because it's what you do. And one thing that Regine and her team found is that it's not that church makes you depressed. It's that she thinks people more given to feel more deeply are the ones who go into ministry. And they're also people who are likely to experience some level of depression at some point. But we are likely to experience a greater level of joy than the average citizen walking around at some point. And I think that's a trade I would take. Like, I'd rather face some of the difficulty of depression if it also means I'm likely to experience some of the delight of life. But it also undercuts one of my clergy talking points, which is, yeah, my church is making me miserable. Like, no, dude, you are the kind of person who was going to be miserable if you were growing vegetables. So, but you're also the kind of person who's going to be happier growing vegetables. Like, I'd take that trade.
Oh my goodness. There is so much there, Jason. Like, first of all, it's a theory of mine that that the congregation and clergy life is not the source of depression, but we're looking more into that. And so and one of the ways that other people on my team, David Eagle is leading the Seminarians Entering Ministry project, which is surveying and doing interviews with the first year MDiv students and MTS students at Duke, and is going to follow them out into ministry, again, thanks to the Duke Endowment. And so then we're actually going to be able to get a sense of, do you start seminary with a history of depression or not? But the other thing that you said about joy is so true. Like, we see from the surveys that the clergy take over and over again, above average rates of flourishing and positive mental health, higher levels, of meaning and social contribution that you would expect, but also of positive emotions, which bodes really well for being a leader who can be open-minded and humble and listening and discerning. Those levels of flourishing are really important. So good. I'm glad you'll take the joy. And I think that is spread out there.
I mean, we expect our work to matter. And that's why we get so frustrated when it feels like we're fighting something that doesn't matter. Like, we're taking part with God in renewing creation. But instead, it seems like we're babysitting a committee that can't stop gossiping. It's the obverse of a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're well positioned as clergy in North Carolina to receive this second Salah well. And because we do the practices, we are kind of all in when we commit to it. And these are all based on different ways to reduce stress in our lives. So hopefully, if we can commit and be a part of it, then the stress will reduce. Doesn't say anything about the joy, so we can still have all the joy and just a little bit less of the stress. So there are three choices. And Regine, I wondered if you could tell us, maybe just highlight what those three choices are.
Yes, that's great. So we, with 74 clergy, United Methodist clergy across the state, we piloted all of these choices, and more. These were the ones that rose to the top. So I can definitively tell you that clergy are willing to do and engage in these programs, and also that we saw nice levels of stress reduction in the pilot. So we're only bringing you what we believe will work, even though we're going to be testing it further. So one of them is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. I bet all your listeners have heard this term out there before. We are partnering with Duke Integrative Medicine to hold that. It will come with an overnight workshop. One of the things we learned in Spirited Life is that clergy like to get together with each other, as do we all, but clergy are particularly relational. We also learned that they need to kind of be able to step away from church life in order to be able to kind of calmly take in new information and try new practices. So all three of these have overnight workshops. And mindfulness-based stress reduction will start that way. And it includes practices like walking meditation, body scans, kind of breath awareness, loving kindness meditation. I have to say, last night, not only do we test these programs with clergy, but we kind of test them on ourselves. Part of the reason why I have loved the last 12 years of working with clergy and now looking at stress is like, who doesn't experience stressors and who doesn't experience stress? And so I learned so much from you all. And so last night, I actually was pretty stressed myself. I had an interaction with my 13-year-old daughter that did not go well at all. Well, I may have yelled. She may have stomped off. We may not have done the chores and the good parenting things that I think are really essential. And I was actually getting ready for something for a group of clergy, and I did a loving kindness meditation. And as part of my work, and after 10 minutes, I was so calm. I'm stunned by it, and I think I'm going to pick that up myself. I know I'm talking a lot. So that's the first program. That's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. The second program is a spiritual practice, the Daily Examine. A lot of people may well be familiar with the 500-year-old Jesuit practice. That is something that you can do very simply on your own, any time of the day. It averages about 10 to 12 minutes. And you just walk through the steps of being thankful, giving thanks to God, thinking about your last 24 hours, thinking about the powerful moments in those last 24 hours, and either giving more thanks, or if something was troubling, asking for forgiveness from the ultimate forgiver, from God, making a plan for the next day, and then thanking God for the day. And we saw in the pilot that clergy who signed up to do that did it every day. And I know it's called the Daily Examine, and I know it should be done every day, but I didn't know that pastors in the midst of their busy day and who are already often praying would take this time out for another prayer practice. But they did, and saw really good outcomes. And I have to say, doing a prayer practice is valuable in its own right, without having to see good research outcomes like stress reduction. But wouldn't it be beautiful if you could do a prayer practice and it would also lead to better health outcomes? So we thought we would test that one.
It's one of my favorite things, is seeing where we rediscover the treasures of our tradition without trying to, right? So learning the Examine, which is really Ignatius of Loyola's language, we relearn what John Wesley wanted us all doing all the time. Wesley took these exhaustive notes about experiencing grace and sinning and so on. They're so exhaustive, no one reads them. They're hideously boring. And actually, that's what we should all be doing. And there's this explosion of like mindfulness apps and all, which are designed to give you the benefits of spirituality without the dogma, right? So it's just interesting. Our stuff actually works, and lots of other professionals have discovered this and are trying to figure it out. It's our treasure. We just aren't even enjoying it ourselves often.
Yes, thanks for that, Jason. I wasn't sure if clergy would be willing to engage in kind of a Catholic practice, but there was no concern about that whatsoever, because you bring your own frame of reference and theology to it, and there are some joint roots with Wesley in the Daily Examine. And mindfulness-based stress reduction does have roots in Buddhism, and I wouldn't. We're not trying to pretend it doesn't. Right. But they're very practical practices. You can people of any belief can do it without having to adopt another faith tradition at all.
The apps work.
And the data on that are stunningly good across so many studies and so many groups of people. And they also were likewise amongst United Methodist clergy in the pilot.
And then the third one, I think, is called stress proofing.
Yeah, so stress proofing is something that you are not going to have heard of out there, and there aren't apps out there. Although there is a book, and we will make the book. We will give a book to every participant. But stress proofing approaches stress in a whole different way. It's being kind of packaged for us by Glenn Murphy, and he likes to say that that stress proofing bypasses the anxious mind, that you cannot think your way out of stress. And instead, he suggests preparing your body to be in its best relaxed state before you go into a stressful period. And then after you experience stress, there are also these strategies and physical techniques you can do that will release that stress from your body. So some of it is a certain way of walking and breathing. We know that breath is sacred, but it also can prepare your muscles and your whole being for what you're about to face. There's other ways of relieving kind of the muscle tension that you experience, especially around your abdomen, which surprised me. But we can hold our stress there, and you will learn ways to simple, kind of quick ways to relieve that stress. And one of the most ways that I remember stress proofing is that when you get stressed, when I get stressed, like your blood starts to rush and circulate around your system really fast. And you're going to remain stressed or get more and more anxious until you bring that blood flow down. And one reason why exercise works so well as a stress reducer is because you get your blood pumping when you exercise, and then you kind of slowly come down from your exercise, and that brings your blood circulation down you feel calm and good. Maybe not while you're exercising, but 20 minutes later, you feel really great. And so in stress proofing, you learn techniques as to how to speed your breathing up to match the rate of your blood flow. And then by bringing your breathing back down, you actually can slow your blood flow down without having had to take that run around the block.
So these sound like really great opportunities. I think I remember you told me 550 clergy can participate. Is that right?
That's right. We can max out at 550. We hope that many will sign up. I'm not sure where we are today, but after 5 days of registration, we were at 190. So I would love to keep going and raise that number to the maximum. There is a study involved with it. So as some of you will remember from Spirited Life, there will be surveys involved. For a subset, not everyone will also do heart rate variability. So one thing that we learned in Spirited Life is that kind of pen and paper survey measures for stress don't work all that well with clergy. One of the most popular measures out there asks questions like, how often do you feel that things are going your way? And your listeners will know what's wrong with that, but it's not about your way, right? It's about God's way. And so like a pastor comes along with that question and they don't know how to answer it. And so we have found a better pen and paper measure, or one that works better for clergy. But we also, and in the pilot too, we deployed heart rate devices with pastors in Salad. We'll ask them to wear it for 48 hours, 3 times, across 3 months apart. And so by participating, clergy will get the service. Everyone will get an over 1 or 2 night overnight workshop, a couple follow-up sessions over something like Zoom, and also be contributing to something that in Spirited Life wasn't scalable. These are shorter, just by having one overnight and one workshop, it's shorter, but it's also going to be scalable. And by contributing to the surveys and the heart rate variability data, we'll be able to know definitively and shout it from the rooftops what works for clergy in terms of stress reduction. And we could all use some stress reduction.
And then as you do that, it'll be beneficial not only to United Methodist clergy, but to other denominations and really around the world, the information that you're able to gather and the research that you'll write about.
Oh, yes, indeed. And, we're contacted every month or two about different denominations, and we're in close conversation with the Seventh-day Adventist and Catholics and Unitarians and the Episcopal Church, and just many, the gift that that clergy in North Carolina give to this research, we do share far and wide.
So I know I got an email today, and so I'm sure many people have in their inboxes an email that would help them know how to sign up. But the website also gives the information. It's spiritedlife.org. And at spiritedlife.org, there are good descriptions of each of the 3 different options and the time commitments that they take and the leadership and all of that information. So really encourage people to check out the website to get more information. Any last thoughts that you want to share with us?
If I could just say, if you're interested if you're a clergy person interested in Salah, go to that website and sign up really soon. By the time this podcast airs, there might just be 4 or 5 days left. So please sign up. And if you are a lay leader, please support your pastor in these practices and ask him or her about them. And some of these are easy enough to share that they could well bring them back to your church.
Jason?
Well, you asked for any last words. It feels like what you say before an execution, right? So you have me thinking about Baptism of the Lord Sunday, which was yesterday. And it's just striking what baptism is, right? It's a claim that the believer has already experienced death and resurrection. And one of the things it frees us up to do is to live in light of our own death. So I just found my own ministry changed when I started imagining, what would I say to them Sunday if I knew I was going to die on Monday? Like, don't leave anything in the tank. This is urgent. Because one day that will happen, right? Like, it will be our last sermon and we won't know it. Let's just go ahead and act like it now, right? So we're not just killing off a Sunday or a visit to the hospital or a Bible study. What if this is it? And I say that cheerfully because I think we should live every day like that. And I'm just really grateful to this work from the Clergy Health Initiative to help us live more happily in a way that is both joyful and cross-bearing.
So thank you both. We do want clergy to flourish, and this certainly will contribute to the ability to do that. And we appreciate both of you taking the time to share with our listeners about this opportunity for clergy, but also just really ways that we can continue to live healthy lives and to be intentional about that work for ourselves and for others. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. That's WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.